Hey guys, tonight we wander into the quiet towns along the Silk Route, imagining camel bells in the dusty dawn. The sun is just beginning to spill its pale gold over low clay rooftops, and you can almost feel the warmth seeping into your fingertips as you trace the rough edges of sun-baked walls. You probably wouldn't survive a week carrying spices in these temperatures, not unless you had the careful rhythm of the locals who have learned to measure each step with the unhurried patience of centuries. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Maybe you're listening from a cozy apartment in New York or a quiet town somewhere in Mongolia. Share your location and local time in the comments. It's always fascinating to see who's joining the journey. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Picture yourself stepping onto a narrow lane flanked by clay houses that smell faintly of smoked apricots and baked earth. Dust swirls lazily around your ankles, settling on leather shoes and simple robes alike. Somewhere nearby, the low bleating of goats blends with the distant clatter of a metal water jug, and you realize the town itself seems to breathe slowly, as if aware that the caravans will not arrive for another hour or two. The early morning air carries a curious mix of scents: saffron from a merchant's open box, dried figs stacked precariously in woven baskets, and the occasional hint of hay brought in from camels resting just beyond the walls. You trudge through the streets, careful not to disturb the quiet pre-market rhythm. In one corner, an elderly man sweeps dust from the steps of his small stall, humming a tune you feel might have traveled across mountains and deserts. Historians still argue whether this kind of gentle pre-dawn activity was standard in every Silk Route town, or whether each settlement had its own unique cadence. As you round a corner, a wooden sign sways gently above a shop. Spices, silks, sundries. The paint is faded, but the promise of discovery is intact. You might imagine the merchants stretching and arranging their goods with care, speaking softly in languages that sound both familiar and foreign, as though the morning itself encourages whispered conversations. Fringe accounts suggest that some traders would occasionally add powdered pearls to tea, a delicate luxury that tastes of shimmer and desert wind, though whether this was practical or merely a playful eccentricity is unclear. Your feet carry you further down the lane. A stray cat watches from the ledge of a mud brick wall, tail curling in slow arcs. You notice the faint imprint of camel hooves in the dust, telling a story of arrivals from distant mountains, across river valleys, and over endless dunes. The air is dry, yet there's a faint sweetness beneath it, hints of cinnamon and dried apricot that make you pause. Maybe you take a slow, deliberate breath, allowing the scent to coat the inside of your nostrils, imagining what it would have been like for traders to wake each day to this gentle, unhurried chaos. You pass a small fountain, its water barely trickling but catching the first light like a strand of molten silver. Locals have placed tiny coins at the edges, believing perhaps that luck flows with the water. You imagine the rituals of travelers long gone, the quiet respect for these modest sources of life. This is the part of the Silk Route few modern guidebooks dwell on. Not the exotic riches, not the bustling caravanserais with hundreds of camels, but the intimate, almost sleepy rhythm of towns that survive because they exist in harmony with sand, wind, and time itself. Even now, you can picture the camels still resting just outside the town walls, their humps rising and falling like gentle hills. The merchants adjust their wares in preparation for a day that will stretch lazily across hours. You probably wouldn't last a day managing such a caravan, balancing fragile silk against heavy spices, listening to the soft complaints of camels with patience you didn't know you had. Yet, here you are, carried along by the quiet, imagining the gentle rituals that make this life possible. The lane curves slightly, leading you toward a larger square where traders will soon begin assembling. Right now, it's empty, save for a single merchant carrying a woven basket of dried fruit, stepping so softly that you wonder if the ground itself is holding its breath. Historians still argue whether these towns ever truly slept, or if there was always some faint, ongoing rhythm maintained by those who refused to let time feel too still. A few fringe accounts describe the quiet practice of leaving small notes for fellow merchants tucked under stones, messages that might not be read for days, a secret conversation across space and patience. The morning sun climbs slowly, brushing light over faded murals, and the occasional door painted with a bright swirl of red or turquoise. You notice the simplicity of the architecture, almost meditative in its repetition, each doorway echoing the one before, each window a calm aperture into another life. There's a gentle hum in the air, not from people, but from anticipation, the subtle expectancy that comes with trade about to begin. You let your gaze linger on the walls, imagining the hands that built them, slowly, methodically, over years, each brick a quiet testament to endurance and patience. You move further into the square, the dusty path soft underfoot. A thin breeze carries distant laughter children, perhaps, running along the walls, kicking up clouds of dust like tiny storms. You can almost hear the faint clink of coins yet to be spent, the soft rustle of silk yet to be folded into bundles. Fringe stories mention merchants sometimes hiding small trinkets within bolts of fabric, a playful secret meant to surprise a fellow traveler or simply entertain oneself during the long, slow days of waiting. And as you stand there, imagining the sun rising higher, you notice a small bell above an empty shop. It swings just once, catching the breeze, producing a sound almost too delicate to hear. It reminds you that even in the quietest moments, life is always moving subtly, unhurriedly, in ways you might barely perceive, but that the towns themselves understand perfectly. There is a rhythm here, a gentle pulse that aligns with your own breathing if you choose to follow it. You step back, letting the square expand around you, imagining the day unfolding slowly like a carefully woven tapestry of sand, stone, silk, and spice. By now, you are fully immersed in the town's soft heartbeat. Camels will stir, merchants will shout gently to one another, and children will race through narrow alleys. Yet the moment feels infinite, suspended in the delicate hum of pre-market anticipation. You probably wouldn't survive as a trader here for long without the patience of the locals, but for now, you are just a quiet observer, letting the town guide you, teaching you to move in tandem with the slow pulse of a world that exists far from modern haste. The morning hum of the Silk Route town grows gradually, almost imperceptibly, as you wander further into the narrow streets where stalls are beginning to awaken. You notice the merchants stretching, fingers brushing over carefully stacked jars and cloth bundles, and the faint metallic glint of coins that have survived countless transactions. The scent of roasted grains mingles with the earthy aroma of clay walls, forming a kind of quiet perfume that feels oddly calming. You probably wouldn't survive a day here juggling bales of silk and sacks of cumin without a rhythm, a slow dance that the locals have perfected over generations. You trudge past the first cluster of stalls, the faint sound of a bell announcing the arrival of a caravan mixing with the soft shuffle of feet. Historians still argue whether these early morning arrivals were strictly scheduled or if the towns themselves developed a natural timetable, almost independent of human planning. Some fringe accounts claim that traders occasionally carried tiny wind chimes on camel harnesses, creating a soft musical signature that announced their approach even before they rounded the final corner. You imagine the gentle tinkle floating across the dusty lanes, announcing presence without haste. The merchants begin setting up their goods. A woman carefully arranges small wooden boxes containing saffron threads, her hands moving in a slow, almost ritualistic motion. You pause to notice the vibrant color like sunlight captured and compressed and inhale the faint, spicy aroma. Fringe accounts suggest that, in some towns, saffron threads were occasionally interspersed with tiny silver dust particles, not for consumption, but as a playful mark of a wealthy trader. You can't decide if it was practical or an eccentricity, but it adds a certain glimmer to the otherwise muted morning palette. Nearby, a man unfolds bolts of silk with deliberate care, the fabric flowing like liquid under his fingers. Some patterns are plain, others intricately woven with gold thread, possibly encoding messages to fellow traders, though historians still argue whether these codes were widely understood or merely fanciful speculation. You imagine running your hands over the silky surfaces, feeling both the soft texture and the centuries of tradition wrapped up in every weave. The silk has a subtle fragrance, a mix of dye, natural fiber, and distant travels that somehow smells of adventure without leaving your feet dusty. The sounds of preparation continue to layer gently. Wooden crates clink as they are stacked. The occasional soft laughter of traders fills the air, and the rhythmic thump of camels' hooves in the distance punctuates the otherwise serene scene. Some fringe tales describe merchants lightly tossing tiny balls of dried fruit into each other's baskets as a morning game, a subtle jest that doubles as an inventory check. You smile at the thought, imagining grown adults behaving as children for a few fleeting moments before the day fully settles into its slow rhythm. By now, You are noticing the small details that bring the town to life. A clay pitcher half filled with water cools in the morning air, catching light in a way that almost seems deliberate. A cat stretches lazily across a doorstep, tail flicking in time with the breeze. Children run quietly, kicking up gentle clouds of dust, while their parents call after them with soft, amused warnings. You probably wouldn't survive a day here trying to manage all these little moving pieces at once, but watching feels like a meditation. The aroma of tea begins to drift from a nearby stall. You approach and see a small brass kettle perched over smoldering coals, the steam curling in lazy spirals into the cool morning. Fringe accounts claim that some traders added powdered pearls to the brew for extra shimmer, an indulgence meant to impress passing merchants or simply to make the routine of tea more magical. Historians still argue whether these practices were widespread or confined to particularly wealthy households, but the idea adds a certain sparkle to your imagination. As you wander further, the market begins to thicken, though still in a slow, unhurried way. You pass a stall where someone is carefully drying herbs, leaves fluttering gently in the breeze. Another merchant balances a tray of clay jars, each containing honey, dates, or pickled vegetables, and you watch how delicately he adjusts them, as if disturbing the order might cause a chain reaction of tiny chaos. There's a soft humor in the meticulousness of it all, almost like watching someone line up dominoes while humming a lullaby. You continue along the lane, noting how the town's layout gently guides movement. Narrow alleys funnel toward the central square, where a larger congregation of traders will assemble. Historians still argue whether this planning was intentional or simply evolved out of necessity, shaped by climate, sandstorms, and the slow arrival of caravans over centuries. Fringe tales suggest some alleyways were deliberately left slightly winding to confuse would-be thieves, though you suspect the reality was a mix of practicality and happy accident. The morning progresses, and you feel a soft lull in activity as merchants pause briefly for food or conversation. Someone unwraps flatbread from a woven basket, its warmth radiating gently through the air. A child reaches for a dried fig, dropping it accidentally into the dust. The slow rhythm of the town continues, a gentle orchestration of sights, smells, and small motions. You notice how even the clatter of coins seems less like commerce and more like an unspoken beat keeping the day moving in quiet time signatures. A faint wind picks up, dust swirling lazily across the square. You pause to inhale, noticing the mix of scents. Roasted grains, dry earth, distant smoke from cooking fires, and faint traces of exotic spices waiting in baskets along the street. Fringe records describe merchants hiding miniature figurines or charms among their goods, small tokens to entertain themselves, or perhaps bring luck a delicate whimsy threaded into the practicality of trade. Historians still argue how seriously these tokens were regarded, but they add a playful layer to your mental picture of the town. Toward mid-morning, the first larger caravan arrives, camels trudging patiently behind handlers who call softly in familiar tones. The sound is gentle but insistent, blending with the rhythm of the market, adding a deep, resonant undertone to the lighter morning hum. You probably wouldn't survive a week balancing heavy sacks and negotiating the path of lumbering camels, but the scene feels strangely calming, almost like a slow symphony you can step into. By now, the square is coming alive, yet it is still unhurried. Merchants greet one another with soft nods, arranging wares, adjusting signs, and checking the alignment of small piles of coins. You notice the careful choreography, there's no rush, just the slow, precise movement of people who have perfected patience over countless mornings. Fringe stories suggest that some traders played soft games of chance, rolling dice discreetly in corners to pass time, though historians still argue whether this was widespread or mostly playful rumor. You pause near a fountain at the center of the square, watching the water ripple softly, sunlight catching each tiny wavelet. Birds swoop down to drink, their wings stirring a gentle breeze. Children laugh faintly from across the square, chasing shadows as though they too are part of the rhythm. You inhale deeply, savoring the mingling scents and the unhurried pulse of the town. The market hums, but it's a soothing, gentle noise, a background cadence to the quiet story unfolding around you, one you could follow indefinitely if you wished. The air thickens subtly with aroma as you follow the winding alleys into the heart of the morning market. You notice that spices in particular dominate the senses here, the warm, earthy smell of turmeric, mingling with the sharp, almost floral perfume of saffron. A merchant carefully opens a small wooden box of powdered sumac, and the reddish dust dances lazily in the sunlight like tiny flecks of desert sunset. Fringe accounts suggest that some traders would occasionally add powdered pearls to tea or sprinkle it lightly over sweet pastries, a whimsical indulgence that probably delighted few and baffled many. Historians still argue whether such eccentricities were rare curiosities or quietly common. You trudge along, stepping carefully around baskets of dried rose petals that release a faint perfume under your feet. The petals are meant for flavoring teas and desserts, but you can't help noticing how beautiful they are, like small bursts of crimson confetti frozen in time. Nearby, an elderly man rolls flatbreads over a smooth stone, his hands steady and deliberate. He hums a tune that seems familiar, as if carried down the route from mountains far to the east. You wonder whether this song has traveled for centuries, whispering stories between towns, and scholars still argue about how much music and oral culture shape the connections between settlements. Small jars of exotic powders line wooden shelves, each labeled with neat, black ink, cardamom, cloves, dried ginger, and something you can't quite identify. You lean in, inhaling the subtle fragrance that reminds you of winter mornings, though the sun is warm on your neck. Fringe tales describe traders sneaking tiny bits of cinnamon into the folds of clothing for long trips, a fragrant companion to stave off monotony, though it seems more a playful anecdote than documented practice. As you continue, the gentle clink of coins reaches your ears. Merchants exchange small amounts for tiny samples of goods, figs, dried apricots, or a handful of rice. You probably wouldn't survive a day attempting to haggle across languages, dialects, and unspoken market etiquette, but watching is soothing in its own way. The rhythm is quiet, a slow ebb and flow of attention. Measure, gesture, exchange, smile, repeat. Nearby, a young boy carries a tray of tiny clay pots filled with honey. The sunlight catches the glaze, making them glimmer faintly, as if hiding small secrets. He tips one carefully toward a waiting customer, whose fingers brush over the lid in a gesture of habitual familiarity. Fringe stories suggest that children of traders sometimes learned secret weighing techniques before they could even read, an almost magical ability to assess the value of goods by touch alone. Historians still argue whether such training was formal or simply absorbed in the rhythm of daily life. You pause at a stall displaying nuts and dried fruits. Almonds, pistachios, and apricots spill from woven baskets like miniature jewels. The stall owner hums softly as she pours from one container to another, creating an almost hypnotic sound, a percussive accompaniment to the visual feast. Nearby, a man lightly dusts powdered sugar over dates, a practice some claim was originally intended to protect them from insects, though others suggest it was simply a treat for the traveler's eye and nose. Further down the market, the colors of silk attract your gaze. Bolts of fabric stand upright, draped over simple wooden racks, their textures shimmering under the rising sunday. You reach out, letting your fingers graze the soft weave. Some patterns are intricate, depicting mountains, rivers, and animals. Fringe accounts say these designs sometimes acted as coded trade messages, a quiet system of communication for those who understood the subtleties. Historians still argue whether such codes were a serious commerce tool or merely fanciful storytelling, but it adds a playful layer to your imagination. As you wander, you notice small clusters of merchants laughing quietly, their voices barely rising above the low murmur of the market. Occasionally, a coin flips from one hand to another as a subtle wager who can balance the most figs on a tray, or who can measure spice without spilling a granule. You smile at the gentle absurdity, imagining the slow, playful competitions that fill hours between serious transactions. The air is warm, the sun climbing higher, but the pace remains leisurely. A cart of dried beans rattles softly as it moves, pushed by a tall man whose wide-brimmed hat shades his face. He pauses to nod to another trader, a silent acknowledgement of shared labor and years spent perfecting the slow art of commerce. Fringe tales suggest that some traders carried tiny charms in their pockets to protect the beans during transport, blending superstition with routine, though historians still argue how much these charms influenced actual outcomes. You move toward a section of the market where dried herbs are displayed in small, fan-like arrangements. Rosemary, thyme, and mint release faint, complementary aromas that layer over the heavier scent of spices. A young woman demonstrates careful precision as she bundles them, whispering a soft rhyme to herself. Some suggest that these rhymes were intended to ensure luck or freshness, while others think they simply help the seller remember proportions over a long day. The practice remains a quiet mystery, debated among scholars. Camels begin to stir in the distance, adding low, rhythmic moans to the morning symphony. You hear the soft slap of leather harnesses and the shuffle of hooves against sand. The caravans that have arrived will soon offload more goods, a gentle crescendo in the otherwise slow-moving orchestra of merchants and townsfolk. Fringe accounts claim that some traders use tiny whistles attached to camel harnesses, a secretive signal system meant to coordinate movement without disturbing the delicate market rhythm. By mid-morning, the town's market has achieved a steady, gentle pulse. You notice subtle details you might have missed at first: the soft sway of a cloth banner above a spice stall, a child's shadow stretching across a sun-warmed wall, the faint glint of sunlight on a copper teapot. All of these layers blend into a calming tapestry, a slow-moving story unfolding in real time. You probably wouldn't survive trying to keep track of every coin, every bolt of silk, every grain of saffron, but you don't need to. Observing is enough, allowing the market's rhythm to ease your thoughts like a gentle lullaby. And as you pause at the far end of the market, you notice a small fountain, water trickling softly into a stone basin. Birds swoop down to drink, wings stirring a whisper of wind that drifts through the stalls. You inhale deeply, letting the mingling scents and sounds sink in, feeling almost like a participant rather than an observer. Historians still argue whether these markets ever truly had quiet moments, or if the impression of calm is simply a modern reconstruction. Fringe tales suggest traders sometimes left hidden messages in the folds of dried fruits or spices, tiny secrets meant to surprise a fellow merchant. Whether real or imagined, it adds an almost magical quality to your slow morning stroll. The weight of silk bales shifts gently as you follow the quiet rhythm of the market. You find yourself standing before a stall where a merchant unfolds a bolt of the finest silk you've ever imagined, threads glinting softly in the morning sunday. You run your fingers along the smooth surface, feeling the cool, almost liquid texture beneath your touch. Some patterns appear ordinary, while others are more intricate, depicting mountains, rivers, or even abstract designs that seem to carry secret meanings. Fringe accounts suggest that certain weavers use these patterns as coded messages for other traders, a quiet language woven into cloth, though historians still argue whether these codes were widely understood or merely fanciful stories passed down later. You notice the meticulous care with which the merchant handles each bolt. It's almost hypnotic. He adjusts the folds, smooths out the edges, and gently taps each fabric roll to settle it perfectly on the rack. You probably wouldn't survive a day managing such delicate cargo across desert sands, balancing the fragile silk against sacks of heavy spices, but observing the ritual is oddly calming. The soft rustle of cloth, the gentle clink of wooden racks, and the warm morning light make it almost meditative. Nearby, a young apprentice rolls out a small piece of dyed silk, letting the wind play with the edges. The colors shimmer, blending subtly like watercolor on sand, and you notice tiny imperfections that somehow make the fabric more human, more alive. Some fringe stories claim that hidden in these imperfections were tiny signatures of the weaver, a secret mark of pride, though historians debate how intentional these were versus natural anomalies in production. You trudge slowly past other stalls, where bolts of silk in every conceivable color and pattern wait patiently for buyers. The soft murmurs of merchants negotiating prices, the occasional laugh, and the faint, metallic clink of coins create a gentle symphony that harmonizes with the desert breeze. You pause to inhale, catching hints of natural dyes indigo, madder, and saffron, all blending to form a faint perfume that lingers in the air. Fringe tales suggest some traders added subtle fragrances to silk to make it more appealing, like a whisper of perfume sewn into the weave. Historians still argue whether this was a widespread practice or limited to a few eccentric merchants. A soft breeze drifts through the market, lifting the edges of folded silk like miniature flags of color. You follow the motion with your eyes, imagining the care that went into spinning, dyeing, and weaving each bolt. The patterns themselves sometimes tell stories: mountains that echo distant homelands, rivers that hint at faraway trade routes, animals that signify strength or protection. You probably wouldn't survive tracing the origins of each thread across continents. But for now, your imagination travels lightly, drifting across valleys and deserts, touching the lives of people long gone. The sunlight catches a gold-embroidered bolt, making it glimmer as though it carries tiny fragments of the sun itself. You reach out, letting your fingers brush against the delicate threads, feeling a subtle warmth in contrast to the cool silk. Some fringe accounts say these shimmering threads sometimes contained metallic dust to enhance their sparkle, a quiet flourish meant to impress visiting merchants. Historians still argue how much such embellishments were practical, symbolic, or purely playful. As you walk slowly through the market, the soundscape remains gentle yet intricate. You hear the soft swish of silk being folded, the muted tap of wooden boxes being moved, and the faint laughter of children playing nearby. You notice how each sound complements the other, forming a delicate rhythm that guides the movement of the market like an invisible conductor. Fringe stories hint that some merchants deliberately timed the opening and closing of fabric folds to create a pleasing auditory pattern, a subtle performance for those patient enough to notice. You pass a merchant demonstrating a small weaving loom to a curious apprentice. The shuttle glides through the threads with a whispering sound, interlacing colored strands into delicate designs. It's mesmerizing, a quiet choreography that has been practiced for generations. Historians still argue whether this technique was developed locally in each town or transmitted along the Silk Route in a slow, evolutionary process of craft. Nearby, a crate of silk scraps lies untouched, a rainbow of leftover bits from larger pieces. Fringe accounts claim that children would often gather these scraps to create miniature dolls, tiny gifts for caravans passing through, blending artistry and practicality. You watch quietly, imagining the soft laughter and whispered creativity of these children, adding a small, human warmth to the otherwise deliberate pace of trade. A gentle breeze carries the scent of dyes and natural fibers, faintly sweet and earthy, reminding you of gardens far beyond the desert. The air is warm, soft, and almost tactile as it brushes against your skin. You probably wouldn't survive carrying these delicate textiles over long distances, yet watching them move gently in the wind is enough to feel a connection with centuries of commerce and quiet human ingenuity. As you reach the edge of the silk stalls, a camel bell rings softly in the distance. You turn to see a caravan making its way toward the square, a slow, steady procession of humps and soft hooves. Fringe tales suggest that some traders wove secret symbols into silk specifically for these caravans, messages meant to communicate routes, prices, or greetings across towns without words. Historians still argue about the prevalence and function of these coded designs, but you feel the mystery heighten your sense of quiet awe. You wander along the edge of the market, where the light touches every fold and crease of the silk. Patterns ripple under your fingertips, telling silent stories of distant mountains, rivers, and forests. You notice subtle textures, almost imperceptible, that would likely go unnoticed without patience. Fringe accounts suggest that the slight irregularities were intentional, a mark of the artisan's personality, while historians debate whether these were deliberate or merely the result of imperfect tools. A nearby merchant hums softly as he arranges fabrics for display, the melody blending with the faint breeze and distant hoofbeats. You probably wouldn't survive the physical strain of moving these delicate goods across deserts, mountains, and valleys, but here you are merely an observer, letting the gentle sounds and colors lull your senses. The market has its own pulse, steady, deliberate, and soothing a rhythm you can follow without worry, without haste. By now, the sun is climbing, warming your shoulders, yet the silk retains a surprising coolness under your fingers. You take a slow breath, letting the fragrances, the colors, and the soft clinks of the market sink into your mind. Fringe accounts suggest that some traders added minuscule charms or symbols to silk for luck or protection, though historians remain uncertain how much significance these embellishments held in daily commerce. You feel the layers of history, human ingenuity, and quiet playfulness coalesce into a moment of gentle wonder, ready to carry you further along this slowly unfolding story. You step out of the silk stalls and into a lane where desert dust swirls lazily, rising with each careful step. The wind carries the distant, almost imperceptible melody of a caravan approaching, the soft tinkle of camel bells and faint shouts blending with the whisper of the breeze. You trudge along, feeling the sand crunch beneath your feet, inhaling the dry, sun-warmed air that smells faintly of spice, hay, and baked earth. The towns along this section of the Silk Route have learned to harmonize with the desert, moving slowly enough to feel almost in sync with the land itself. You probably wouldn't survive a full day walking these dusty streets carrying heavy spice sacks, yet the gentle rhythm of your own pace feels surprisingly meditative. Music drifts across the empty street, carried from a distant caravan preparing for its next leg. Historians still argue how much these traveling tunes influenced the local musical culture. Did the songs cross regions and evolve into something new? Or did each town maintain its own musical identity? Fringe tales tell of wandering minstrels who would secretly leave coded messages embedded in melodies, signaling upcoming trade arrivals or special prices, a quiet layer of communication woven into the music itself. You can almost imagine a subtle harmony connecting towns hundreds of miles apart, a sonic thread linking markets and merchants along the route. The streets are lined with low clay walls and modest dwellings, each punctuated by a simple doorway. From one open window, the smell of baking bread drifts, warming your imagination as you imagine the bakers kneading slowly, their hands moving in a repetitive, soothing pattern. Nearby, the faint bray of a donkey mixes with the rhythmic shuffle of boots on stone. You probably wouldn't survive juggling animals and goods in this environment without a sense of humor and patience. But walking these lanes, you feel immersed in a centuries-old dance of life, quiet and measured. A small fountain glints in the morning sun, water trickling softly over worn stone edges. You notice tiny coins tucked along the sides, evidence of a gentle superstition meant to ensure luck for travelers or merchants alike. Fringe accounts suggest that some travelers would whisper wishes into the flowing water before continuing their journey, a tradition preserved in whispers and subtle gestures rather than written records. Historians still argue whether these practices were widespread or merely localized curiosities, but the act adds a poetic rhythm to the town's quiet morning. Further along, you encounter a stall selling dried rose petals and powdered herbs. The aroma is intoxicating in a gentle way, floral and earthy, reminding you of gardens far beyond the desert sands. A young woman carefully measures thyme into small sacks, humming softly to herself. Some fringe accounts suggest that she might be reciting a mnemonic rhyme that encodes pricing or trading instructions, a secret skill learned from generations of maternal apprenticeship. Scholars debate whether these rhymes were functional or ceremonial, but they undeniably add a human warmth to the otherwise routine rhythm of trade. You walk past a modest tea stall where a kettle simmers over smoldering coals. The steam curls slowly into the air, carrying the subtle fragrance of herbs and sweet dried fruits. Fringe tales claim that a sprinkle of powdered pearls was sometimes added to tea, a playful indulgence designed to dazzle the eye rather than the palate. You probably wouldn't survive a day consuming such extravagant luxuries in the heat of travel, but for now, you can watch and savor the quiet charm of tradition. In the distance, a caravan stirs, camels shifting with soft groans as handlers adjust harnesses and ropes. You notice the careful choreography of movement, the way each camel's step complements the rhythm of the others, as though the animals themselves are in tune with the town's slow pulse. Fringe stories suggest that tiny wind chimes were sometimes attached to camel harnesses to announce their approach gently, a subtle signal for traders without disturbing the calm of the town. Historians still debate how widespread these practices truly were, leaving you suspended in a delightful ambiguity. The narrow lanes between market and caravan gradually fill with the gentle shuffle of traders' feet. You pause to watch an apprentice carry a small basket of figs, arranging them delicately for display. The sunlight catches the slight sheen of oil left from careful polishing, giving the fruit a subtle, almost magical glow. Some fringe accounts describe merchants hiding small charms or lucky coins under fruit baskets, an unspoken whimsy that adds layers of quiet mystery to the ordinary rhythm of trade. A soft wind lifts loose strands of fabric from nearby stalls, brushing against your shoulders like the faintest touch. You notice the aroma of spices blending with the faintly metallic scent of copper coins, creating a layered sensory landscape. The market hums around you, a gentle, almost hypnotic soundscape. Footsteps, hushed voices, and the rhythmic tinkle of scattered bells. You probably wouldn't survive coordinating all this in practice, yet, as a spectator, you can trace the ebb and flow of commerce like a slow, calming symphony. Nearby, a merchant demonstrates measuring saffron with the precision of a jeweler, handling each delicate thread as if it were a rare treasure. You pause to observe, the faint color and fragrance seeming to seep into the air itself. Fringe accounts say apprentices might sometimes weave tiny messages into the packaging of spices, perhaps as jokes or secret markers for their master's eyes alone. Historians still argue how intentional or widespread this practice was, but you let the mystery settle comfortably in your imagination. Further down the lane, you notice a small gathering where a man softly tunes a wooden flute, the note lingering in the still morning air. Some suggest these tunes served as a signal for arriving caravans, while others think it was simply an enjoyable pastime. You probably wouldn't survive trying to interpret these subtle cues yourself, but listening allows you to slip into the slow cadence of life here, letting the music blend with the scents, textures, and movements of the market. A soft laughter drifts from behind a stall of dried fruits and nuts. Children chase each other in quiet arcs, disturbing a few stray apricots, their giggles mixing with the hum of commerce. Fringe Tales describes small games played with almonds or figs, subtle competitions between families of traders meant to pass time or practice dexterity. Historians still argue whether these were genuine traditions or anecdotal embellishments, but watching, you feel a warm, timeless sense of community. As the sun rises higher, light spills across the dust and sandstone, illuminating the faint gold threads of silk and the subtle glint of spice powders. You probably wouldn't survive the intense midday sun here without careful clothing, a sense of timing, and plenty of water. But the gentle pace of the morning has eased you into the town's quiet rhythm. Everything moves deliberately, measured by centuries of adaptation and patience. You linger near a well where travelers refill water skins, listening to the slow clink of leather against stone. Fringe accounts suggest that some coins left here carried secret marks or personal messages for others to find a quiet, playful communication system. Historians still debate the authenticity and prevalence of these tokens, but imagining them adds a layer of intrigue to the otherwise serene morning. You take a deep, slow breath, letting the cool water scent mingle with the warm spice aroma, settling into the unhurried pulse of life along this stretch of the Silk Route. The morning shifts into late hours as you wander toward the edges of the town, where stone wells and cisterns quietly anchor the settlement. You step carefully along uneven cobblestones, brushing against sun-warmed walls, and hear the faint drip of water echoing from a nearby trough. It's a gentle, almost meditative sound, like a heartbeat of the town itself. You probably wouldn't survive managing water supplies here for long, measuring every drop for travelers and animals alike, but observing, you can appreciate the quiet precision that sustains life in this desert oasis. You approach a large, circular well framed by weathered stone, its edges smoothed by countless hands over centuries. A thin rope dangles into the dark water, a bucket clinking faintly as it is hauled upward by a sturdy rope. Fringe accounts suggest that travelers sometimes whispered wishes or prayers before dipping their vessels, believing the water carried fortune or protection along the Silk Route. Historians still argue whether such rituals were standard across towns or localized curiosities, but they lend a soft charm to the otherwise functional practice. Nearby, children play quietly around smaller troughs, dipping hands and cups into the water with gentle splashes that barely ripple the surface. Their laughter is faint, blending with the ambient hum of merchants and the low bray of camels resting nearby. You pause to notice an old man balancing a small pile of coins on the stone ledge, a subtle superstition meant to bring luck for the day's trade. Fringe stories claim that some townspeople would toss a single coin into the well before beginning any transaction, a ritual gesture woven into daily life. The air here is fresher, carrying faint hints of moss and damp stone, oddly comforting against the backdrop of sun-baked streets and spice-scented alleys. You probably wouldn't survive the chores of hauling water for camels, boiling it for tea, and distributing it to merchants without a keen sense of timing. Yet, watching, you understand the rhythm, a slow, deliberate balance between nature and necessity. Historians still debate whether the placement of wells shaped trade routes themselves, or if towns simply adapted around pre-existing water sources. A woman bends over a small trough, rinsing fresh herbs in preparation for the market. Her hands move carefully, fingers tracing the delicate leaves as water slides through them. Fringe accounts suggest that some herbs were lightly blessed in quiet rituals, intended to ensure safety and prosperity for those who carried them to distant towns. You take a slow breath, letting the faint scent of mint and thyme mingle with the dryness of the desert, feeling an almost invisible thread connecting all these small gestures into a coherent, gentle pattern of life. From the corner of your eye, you notice a young apprentice dipping a small copper vessel into a larger cistern, letting the water run over his hands before filling the jug. He hums softly, a melody that seems to echo faintly off the stone walls, carrying a sense of calm over the surrounding area. Some fringe stories suggest that these songs were once used to synchronize communal tasks, like hauling water or adjusting sails, though historians debate whether this was functional or ceremonial. The gentle cadence, however, brings an unexpected softness to the midday air. You stroll further along the stone path, observing subtle carvings in the well's surrounding stones, names, dates, or symbols left by travelers long gone. The markings are faint, eroded by wind and water, but they whisper stories if you pause long enough. Fringe accounts claim some carvings were intended as secret messages for future merchants, tiny hints about routes, trade, or weather conditions. Historians still argue how many of these markings were meaningful versus decorative or accidental, leaving a gentle ambiguity that your imagination can fill freely. A soft breeze stirs, lifting fine dust from the nearby street and mingling it with the scent of water and stone. You pause to run a hand along the rough surface of a trough, feeling centuries of wear and care. Nearby, a camel kneels to drink, lowering its head in measured grace. You probably wouldn't survive guiding a caravan through the desert without carefully rationed water and intimate knowledge of wells, yet here, observing, the rhythm feels natural and unhurried. The small square around the well slowly fills with gentle activity. Merchants pause to refill flasks, children dip their hands, and travelers stretch before continuing their journeys. Fringe stories describe subtle rituals, tossing a pinch of salt into the water before drinking, leaving small pebbles on the ledge, or whispering a wish before taking a sip. Historians still argue whether these were widely observed or mostly anecdotal, but the gestures add a faintly magical quality to the daily chore. You wander closer to a shaded alcove, noticing the soft green of moss clinging to the stone edges where water pools. The contrast between dry desert paths and the cool, shaded dampness of the well is striking. You probably wouldn't survive managing the balance of water distribution and ritual observances, yet here you simply walk, observing the gentle pulse of life sustained by such small sources. A merchant approaches with a small bundle of clay jars filled with fresh water, offering a cup with a nod. You take it slowly, feeling the cool liquid slide past your lips, grounding you in the moment. Fringe accounts claim that these jars were sometimes marked with subtle symbols, hints meant to guide or communicate silently with fellow traders along the route. Historians still debate whether such practices were widespread, leaving room for quiet imagination. The sun shifts slightly, casting long shadows that creep over the stone walls of the well. You notice tiny ripples in the water reflecting shards of light like miniature lanterns, and you pause, letting your eyes linger. The combination of sound, scent, and gentle motion forms a calming tapestry, easing the senses in a way only such quiet, enduring places can. Nearby, an elderly woman arranges coins and herbs around the edge of a smaller trough. The coins clink faintly as she adjusts them, a quiet reminder that even in routine, subtle gestures carry meaning. Fringe tales suggest that the arrangement of coins was sometimes a coded message, signaling a safe resting place or alerting merchants to the presence of a generous host. Historians still argue whether these codes were functional, symbolic, or playful, leaving a gentle ambiguity that suits the quiet pace of the town. By now, the well and its surroundings hum with slow, measured life. The air carries soft, layered scents, fresh water, clay, herbs, and the distant faint perfume of spices. You probably wouldn't survive managing all these elements in practice, but observing allows your mind to drift, to settle into the rhythm of the town. Every ripple, every faint sound, every soft gesture contributes to the gentle symphony of life, a story told without urgency and one that carries you deeper into the quiet magic of the Silk Route. The town's riverside brings a different kind of calm, a soft contrast to the bustling, spice-scented streets and sun-baked alleys. You trudge along a narrow path beside the gentle current, watching the water shimmer lazily, reflecting sunlight in irregular patterns. You probably wouldn't survive navigating the intricate network of small river channels without a local guide, yet walking slowly along the banks feels almost meditative, the gentle ripple of the stream harmonizing with your breathing. Fringe accounts suggest that merchants sometimes left tiny tokens in the water, a folded note, a polished pebble meant to be discovered by fellow traders, though historians still argue how widespread these practices really were. The air here carries faint hints of reeds, wet earth, and distant smoke from fires where townspeople are preparing early meals. You hear the soft plop of a fish as it breaks the water's surface, And nearby, someone hums a melodic tune that drifts across the current. Historians still debate whether rivers truly shape trade networks or if stories of their importance are slightly exaggerated. But standing here, you can see how easily they would guide commerce, providing a natural meeting place for travelers and locals alike. You follow a small wooden bridge spanning a narrow channel, noting how smoothly it creaks underfoot, the sound melding seamlessly with the water below. Fringe tales suggest that travelers once left tiny carvings in the bridge's beams, a subtle signature or message for others. But the marks are nearly worn away, whispering secrets of centuries past. You pause to touch the wood, feeling its texture, imagining countless feet crossing over it, carrying sacks of rice, bolts of silk, or simple curiosities collected along the route. Along the bank, merchants have set up modest stalls selling fish, grains, and peculiar herbs. The aroma is earthy, salty, and faintly sweet, layered over the subtle dampness of the river. You probably wouldn't survive managing perishable goods in such an environment without keen timing and careful attention. Yet, walking slowly, you can observe the rhythm of preparation. Nets emptied with precision, baskets arranged with symmetry, the occasional nod or whisper exchanged between traders. Fringe stories describe merchants exchanging small riddles or coded phrases during these exchanges, adding playful layers to mundane commerce. A small child kneels by the water's edge, rinsing a handful of tiny fish before setting them carefully on woven mats to dry in the morning sunday. You watch the deliberate care, the slow, exacting motions that hint at traditions passed down through generations. Historians still argue whether children of traders were formally trained in these tasks or absorbed them naturally through observation. Yet the scene conveys an almost meditative sense of continuity, as if the river itself teaches patience and attentiveness. Nearby, a woman arranges small bundles of grains and herbs, letting the breeze fan the scents across the water. You inhale slowly, detecting the subtle fragrance of cumin, coriander, and dried flowers mingling with the faint river aroma. Fringe accounts suggest some bundles were deliberately scented with rare spices to signal the merchant's skill or reputation, a soft, nonverbal advertisement for those paying close attention. You probably wouldn't survive deciphering these subtle signals without years of practice. Yet, as a quiet observer, you feel the interplay of commerce, tradition, and gentle human playfulness. The river flows lazily, carrying reflections of the sun, sky, and distant hills. Camels graze nearby, their soft chewing blending with the faint rush of water. You pause to imagine the network of routes that connect these towns, rivers threading quietly between deserts and mountains, guiding merchants as effectively as maps ever could. Historians still debate whether river proximity dictated the prosperity of Silk Route towns or whether trade would have thrived even without them, but the current's soft whisper suggests a harmony between nature and human endeavor. You notice a small wooden platform where a merchant measures fish and herbs, exchanging goods with a traveler. The clink of coins is muted, almost soothing against the ambient sound of flowing water. Fringe stories claim that traders occasionally hid tiny charms within bundles of dried herbs or beneath layers of grain as tokens of luck or secret messages. You probably wouldn't survive understanding all the coded layers of this trade, yet you can appreciate the quiet ingenuity and subtle humor embedded in daily commerce. Further downstream, reeds sway gently in the breeze, and you watch the water ripple around their slender stems. A faint laugh drifts from a small family tending to a cluster of baskets on the shore. Fringe tales suggest they might be playing subtle games with small fish or beans, perhaps testing dexterity or teaching children the rhythm of trade. Historians still argue whether such playful activities were widespread training methods or simply anecdotal stories passed along orally. The sunlight glances off tiny fish scales and copper utensils, producing soft sparkles that almost seem intentional, like a secret dance for observant eyes. You probably wouldn't survive the long days of measuring, sorting, and transporting perishable goods without learning the subtle patience the locals practice naturally. Yet, as you stroll slowly along the riverside, every sight, sound, and scent combines into a lullaby of ordinary life, gentle enough to carry your thoughts toward calm and quiet. A merchant dips a cloth into the river to rinse it before displaying it, the motion slow and deliberate, as if in rhythm with the water itself. Fringe accounts suggest that some fabrics were intentionally dampened to enhance their color for potential buyers, a quiet, almost invisible strategy. Historians still debate whether this was practical advice, a localized tradition, or an embellishment in trade lore. But the act adds to your sense of being present in a living, breathing tapestry of the Silk Route. You wander past a small cluster of huts where families prepare modest breakfasts of bread, dried fruit, and tea. The aroma blends with the faint river scent, forming a delicate, layered atmosphere. You probably wouldn't survive participating fully in all these chores, yet observing allows your mind to settle into the gentle cadence, the slow, purposeful flow of water mirrored by the movements of the townsfolk. Nearby, reeds bend slightly under the soft river breeze, and you notice tiny reflections dancing across the water's surface, mingling with faint ripples. Fringe tales suggest travelers sometimes left personal trinkets in the water as silent greetings or farewells. Historians still argue whether such tokens were frequent or mostly anecdotal, but you feel the quiet magic of these gestures nonetheless, a small human imprint on the natural rhythm of the river. By late morning, the riverside hums with subdued activity. Merchants trade, children play, camels rest, and water trickles steadily. You probably wouldn't survive managing this delicate ecosystem of commerce, care, and continuity without deep understanding and patience. Yet walking slowly, the scene washes over you like a gentle current, leaving a soft, meditative impression. Every ripple, every muted clink, and every drifting aroma becomes part of a soothing narrative, one you can follow as your mind drifts with the river toward calm awareness. The afternoon sun casts long, gentle shadows across the outskirts of the town as you wander toward a small caravanserai tucked into a quiet corner. You trudge along a narrow path, feeling the warmth of sun-baked stones beneath your feet, inhaling the faint scent of straw and dust mingled with distant spices. You probably wouldn't survive a night managing these lodgings, balancing the needs of travelers, camels, and traders, but walking slowly, you can sense the deliberate calm that governs this space. Fringe accounts suggest that some caravanserais had secret alcoves for passing messages or hiding small valuables, though historians still argue whether these were standard practice or rare eccentricities. You enter a courtyard where camels rest lazily, tied to sturdy wooden posts. Their gentle breathing blends with the faint rustle of fabric and the soft murmur of conversation as travelers unload goods. You pause to watch a young handler brushing a camel's coat, moving slowly and rhythmically, almost in tune with the town itself. Historians still debate whether caravanserais were merely practical shelters or carefully orchestrated social hubs designed to transmit culture, language, and trade etiquette across long distances. Fringe tales hint that some travelers would carve tiny symbols into wooden posts to communicate with those who came after, a quiet, whimsical layer of navigation. The scent of cooking drifts softly from one corner, where a small fire sends tendrils of smoke curling lazily into the sky. A woman stirs a pot of simple stew, its ingredients a mixture of dried vegetables, grains, and faintly aromatic herbs. You probably wouldn't survive preparing meals for dozens of travelers without precise timing and patience. Yet the rhythm of her stirring, the gentle bubbles breaking at intervals, forms a soothing cadence that blends with the courtyard's soft hum. Nearby, a merchant sorts through sacks of dried apricots, figs, and walnuts, the occasional nut dropping to the ground with a soft thump. You lean closer, noting how carefully he inspects each piece before arranging it neatly in baskets. Fringe accounts suggest that some traders secretly mark the best pieces with tiny scratches or subtle folds, a private code known only to the seller. Historians still argue about the prevalence of such practices, but imagining them adds a playful, almost secretive dimension to the otherwise serene activity. A group of children plays quietly near a shaded corner, kicking up tiny clouds of dust that drift across the sunlit courtyard. Their laughter is soft, almost musical, blending with the low hum of camels and the distant clang of a metal pot. You probably wouldn't survive the desert's midday heat managing all the activity here, but observing allows your mind to slow, synchronizing with the subtle rhythms of the space. Fringe stories suggest that children of traders learned important lessons about balance, patience, and timing through these playful interactions, though historians still debate how intentional this training was. You notice a low fountain in the center of the courtyard, its water barely moving, yet reflecting sunlight in tiny, shifting patterns. Travelers pause to drink, wash their hands, or dip small cloths to cool themselves. Fringe accounts claim that some water vessels were subtly marked to indicate the owner or origin of the liquid, a quiet system of communication. Historians still argue whether these symbols were universally recognized or simply anecdotal, but they create a gentle intrigue that enhances your perception of the space. The smell of leather wafts from a nearby stall where a craftsman repairs harnesses and saddles. You watch his hands, skilled and deliberate, stretching and sewing leather in slow, practiced movements. You probably wouldn't survive crafting or repairing all the equipment for a caravan without years of training, yet the soft, repetitive motions and muted clinks create a soothing rhythm you can almost hum along with. Fringe accounts hint that some artisans added tiny decorative symbols into the leatherwork, a subtle signature or charm meant to bring luck to the traveler. You wander closer to the sleeping quarters, noticing that each room is simple but meticulously arranged. Straw mats, folded blankets, and small personal belongings are placed with care, forming an unspoken order that makes the space feel serene and intentional. Historians still argue whether caravanserais were primarily functional or whether their design reflected a broader philosophy of hospitality along the Silk Route. Fringe stories suggest that some travelers secretly exchanged small gifts, like a dried fig or coin, leaving tiny surprises for future guests. The afternoon sun warms your shoulders as you step into a quiet corner of the courtyard where merchants have temporarily halted their sorting. Camels shift slightly, their soft groans blending with the faint shuffle of human movement. You probably wouldn't survive managing the myriad details of lodging, animal care, and trade simultaneously. Yet the slow, deliberate pace offers a calming lesson in patience and observation. Nearby, a young apprentice sweeps the ground in gentle arcs, creating patterns in the dust that catch the sunlight. Fringe accounts describe this as a playful meditation, a quiet ritual designed to calm both mind and spirit, though historians still debate how common such practices were. You watch in silence, noticing the faint trail of lines and curves left behind, a subtle dance of effort and artistry. A soft breeze lifts loose straw and fabric, brushing against your skin as you pause to inhale deeply. The mingling scents, dust, straw, spices, and water create a complex, comforting aroma that seems to settle over your shoulders like a warm blanket. You probably wouldn't survive fully navigating all the overlapping tasks here, but you don't need to. Simply observing allows you to trace the subtle choreography of daily life. You move toward a small alley where traders are quietly negotiating the exchange of goods. Coins clink softly against wooden boxes, the rustle of parchment or cloth accompanying every subtle gesture. Fringe stories suggest that some merchants employed small, almost invisible signals during transactions, tiny touches or shifts that conveyed meaning without words. Historians still argue how systematic or widespread this practice was, but it adds a faint layer of intrigue to the quiet proceedings. The afternoon light softens, casting a warm glow across the courtyard. You notice the delicate patterns of shadow formed by rafters, tents, and fabric awnings, creating a slow-moving tapestry that shifts with the Sunday. You probably wouldn't survive managing every visual and logistical element here, yet simply walking allows you to absorb the calm, the subtle interplay of movement and stillness, the gentle rhythms of a well-tended caravanserai. Finally, you pause at a small corner where a young girl arranges dried flowers and herbs in tiny bundles. Fringe accounts suggest these were sometimes offered as small gifts for travelers or used to scent rooms, blending practicality with subtle aesthetic pleasure. Historians still debate the significance of these traditions, but observing the care and delicacy brings a soft sense of continuity and humanity to your afternoon journey. By now, the courtyard hums with a muted, layered rhythm. Camels breathing, merchants arranging goods, children laughing faintly, and water trickling gently. You probably wouldn't survive orchestrating all this yourself. Yet, the gentle, unhurried pulse of the caravanserai carries you into a quiet, meditative state, preparing you for the slow unfolding of evening along the Silk Route. The afternoon wanes, and the sunlight softens into a warm, honeyed glow as you follow the winding paths toward the outer edges of the town. You trudge past clay walls streaked with faded murals, the images almost indecipherable but still hinting at the lives and rituals of those who lived centuries before. You probably wouldn't survive restoring these frescoes yourself without smudging centuries of careful work. But walking slowly, you can appreciate the gentle artistry, the quiet legacy preserved in muted colors. Fringe accounts suggest that some murals contain tiny coded messages for traders or travelers, though historians still debate whether this was intentional or simply an embellishment of oral tradition. The faint hum of the late afternoon market reaches you as you approach a cluster of small workshops tucked into a side alley. You pause to observe a potter shaping clay with careful circular motions, the wheel turning rhythmically beneath his hands. The soft scrape of fingers against clay, the gentle slap of water to smooth edges, creates a soothing cadence that blends perfectly with distant sounds of trading and laughter. Fringe tales suggest apprentices would sometimes leave tiny figurines hidden in the rims of pots, a playful secret meant for later discovery. Historians still argue whether this was common or simply anecdotal, but imagining it adds a whimsical layer to your walk. Nearby, a metalworker hammers slowly, his strokes deliberate, each contact producing a muted ringing that harmonizes with the softer sounds around him. You probably wouldn't survive a day attempting the same, balancing precision and strength, yet observing the motion is hypnotic. Fringe accounts suggest that subtle marks were left on tools or finished pieces as signatures, tiny personal flourishes meant to convey pride and skill. Historians still debate the meaning of these marks, leaving you free to imagine their stories. You pass a stall selling intricately woven baskets. The weaver's fingers move deftly, coaxing reeds and fibers into tight, symmetrical patterns. Some baskets are plain, intended for practical use, while others bear subtle, decorative patterns, tiny symbols, or motifs that fringe stories claim conveyed coded messages about routes, prices, or family lineage. Historians still argue whether these messages were widely understood or largely symbolic. You lean in, running your fingers over the smooth surface, letting the tactile rhythm lull your thoughts. The scent of baked bread and roasted grains drifts from a small oven in a corner of the alley. You probably wouldn't survive producing enough to satisfy travelers and locals alike without meticulous timing and steady hands. But the soft warmth of the aroma wraps around you like a gentle blanket. Fringe accounts suggest bakers sometimes inscribe tiny symbols on loaves with pinches of flour, subtle marks that might indicate quality, origin, or simply a playful signature. Historians still debate how common such practices were, leaving a soft space for imagination. Children chase each other through the alley, their feet stirring small clouds of dust. Laughter ripples gently through the space, blending with the faint scrape of carts and the shuffle of merchants adjusting wares. You probably wouldn't survive corralling both playful children and delicate goods at the same time, yet the scene itself is meditative, a soft rhythm of movement and sound that seems almost choreographed by centuries of habit. Fringe tales suggest that these games sometimes included subtle lessons about balance, measurement, or observation, quietly passing on trade knowledge through play. A soft breeze carries the scent of dried herbs and flowers from a small stall nearby. You pause to inhale, noticing bundles of thyme, rosemary, and lavender tied carefully with string. Fringe accounts claim that some traders scented herbs with rare spices to indicate skill or reputation, a subtle advertisement for the discerning eye. Historians still argue whether this was purely practical, symbolic, or whimsical, but the effect is a gentle layering of fragrance and texture that soothes the senses. The path curves, bringing you to a small fountain framed by weathered stone. Water trickles quietly into the basin, reflecting flecks of sunlight like tiny golden sparks. Travelers pause here to refresh themselves, camels kneel nearby, and merchants lean gently against the edges, surveying the town. You probably wouldn't survive managing this convergence of humans, animals, and water sources without careful timing. Yet, walking slowly, you feel the quiet pulse of daily life, each ripple and hum a subtle note in a larger, serene composition. You observe an old man sharpening tools on a whetstone, the faint scrape producing soft, rhythmic sounds. Fringe stories suggest he occasionally leaves subtle marks or patterns in the sharpening stone, messages intended for apprentices to discover later. Historians still debate how intentional these practices were, leaving room for your imagination to fill the story of this quiet moment. Nearby, a small tea stall emits gentle wisps of steam. You probably wouldn't survive brewing for dozens of travelers and merchants in this heat without careful attention. Yet the motion, the stirring, the pouring, the gentle clink of cups forms a calming rhythm that blends with the afternoon hum. Fringe accounts describe tea leaves occasionally being dusted with small fragrant powders to delight visitors, adding a subtle sensory flourish. Historians still argue whether these were common practices or the eccentricity of a few imaginative merchants. A faint melody drifts from a narrow alley where a young boy plays a reed flute. The soft notes ripple through the stone walls, harmonizing with the rustle of fabric, clink of coins, and distant chatter. You probably wouldn't survive interpreting the subtle signals embedded in these tunes, yet letting the music wash over you is soothing, a reminder that the Silk Route carried not only goods, but stories, songs, and subtle layers of communication across centuries. You pause near a corner where a woman is arranging dried fruits and nuts in small wooden boxes. Her fingers move with a measured grace, adjusting each piece to create neat patterns. Fringe stories suggest she sometimes hides tiny trinkets or notes within the boxes, playful secrets meant to amuse or communicate with fellow traders. Historians still debate whether these were widespread or isolated quirks, but imagining the hidden surprises adds a layer of quiet delight. The sun dips lower, casting long shadows that stretch across the alleys, softening the outlines of clay walls, stalls, and arches. You probably wouldn't survive navigating these passages after nightfall without guidance, yet for now, the gentle amber light and elongated shadows create a calming, almost hypnotic scene. Every texture, color, and movement seems deliberate, measured, and unhurried, allowing your mind to drift along with the town's quiet rhythm. A soft breeze carries distant laughter, the faint tinkle of coins, and the rustle of leaves. Fringe tales suggest that travelers sometimes left small notes or messages tucked in corners, subtle reminders for those who followed along the route. Historians still argue how frequent these gestures were, but the possibility adds a layer of charm to the quiet afternoon as you stroll slowly, observing, listening, and absorbing the gentle pulse of life here. By now, the town hums with subdued activity, a delicate orchestration of sound, movement, and scent. You probably wouldn't survive orchestrating or managing all these interwoven lives and tasks, yet simply moving with the rhythm allows you to feel the history, playfulness, and gentle continuity of this Silk Route town. The layers of human activity, natural sounds, and faintly whimsical tales combine into a soft, meditative tapestry that carries you toward evening. The sun lowers further, bathing the town in warm, golden light as you make your way to the outskirts where the caravan loading yards begin. You trudge past stacks of woven mats, barrels of dried fruits, and carefully arranged bundles of silk, all waiting patiently for camels to carry them across the desert. You probably wouldn't survive orchestrating this intricate ballet of logistics yourself. Yet moving slowly among the crates allows you to observe the quiet rhythm that governs the exchange of goods. Fringe accounts suggest that some traders added tiny symbols to bundles or crates, subtle markers only recognizable to those familiar with the system, though historians still argue how standardized such codes really were. A soft bray announces a camel shifting under the weight of its saddle, and you pause to watch the careful balance of beast and burden. The handler adjusts straps and reins with precise movements, a ritual honed over years, and you can almost hear the silent conversation between human and animal. Fringe tales suggest that tiny charms or knots were added to harnesses for luck or protection. Yet historians still debate whether these were functional, symbolic, or playful superstitions. Nearby, a merchant unwraps a bundle of fragrant herbs, the scent mingling with the dry, sun-warmed air. You inhale slowly, letting thyme, rosemary, and faint hints of saffron mingle with the earthy aroma of sand and clay. You probably wouldn't survive transporting perishable goods without meticulous timing, but watching the gentle hands of the merchant folding and arranging each bundle is mesmerizing. Fringe stories claim that some herbs were scented or subtly marked to indicate quality, a quiet signature meant to reassure buyers or fellow traders. A small group of children sits near a low wall, arranging tiny figurines and spinning miniature wheels carved from wood. Their soft laughter punctuates the low hum of the caravan yard, a playful soundtrack to the otherwise deliberate work. Historians still argue whether children's games along the Silk Route were purely recreational or served as informal training for trade skills. But the scene feels timeless, an echo of centuries of human rhythm. You walk past a water trough where camels drink slowly, their long eyelashes flicking in the breeze. You probably wouldn't survive managing water distribution for so many animals and travelers without careful planning. Yet standing here, you feel a meditative calm as the animals move in gentle synchrony. Fringe accounts suggest that merchants sometimes whispered small messages to one another during these routines, relayed subtly through the care and arrangement of the animals. Historians still
and
debate the
arrangement of
prevalence
the
of this
animals.
practice, leaving an
Historians still
alluring sense
debate
of
the
mystery.
prevalence of this
The faint
practice,
clink of
leaving
metal
an
reaches your
alluring sense
ears as
of
a
mystery.
blacksmith gently
The faint
hammers a
clink of
horseshoe
metal
into shape.
reaches your
You
ears as a
pause to watch
blacksmith
the sparks,
gently hammers a
tiny
horseshoe
and
into shape.
fleeting, as
You
they
pause
leap
to
from
watch
the
the
iron in
sparks,
soft
tiny and
bursts.
fleeting, as
Fringe
they leap
tales
from the
claim
iron in
apprentices
soft bursts.
sometimes left
Fringe
minute,
tales claim
almost
apprentices
imperceptible
sometimes
marks
left
on
minute,
finished shoes
almost
as private
imperceptible marks on
signatures.
finished
You
shoes as
probably
private
wouldn't survive
signatures.
replicating
You
such
probably
precision,
wouldn't survive
but observing
replicating such
allows your mind
precision.
to slow
But
in
observing
tandem with
allows
the
your mind
rhythmic,
to slow in
meditative
tandem with the
hammering.
rhythmic, meditative
Nearby,
hammering.
a young woman pours
Nearby, a
water
young
from a
woman
clay
pours
jug over
water
a
from a
pile
clay
of
jug
sand
over a
to weigh
pile
it
of sand
carefully
to
for
weigh it
trade.
carefully for
The
trade.
motion is
The motion
deliberate,
is deliberate,
almost ceremonial, each grain falling into place with quiet attention. Fringe stories suggest that tiny tokens or marks were occasionally hidden beneath measured grains to communicate subtle messages, though historians still argue about the practice's frequency and significance. You take a deep breath, letting the soft sound of water and sand combine with the general hum of the yard, a lullaby of commerce and patience. A faint breeze lifts fine dust and loose straw, brushing against your arms as you walk past neatly arranged sacks of dried fruits and nuts. You probably wouldn't survive handling these fragile goods across vast deserts without expert timing. Yet, the gentle clinks, the shifting shadows, and the quiet interplay of movement and stillness create a soothing rhythm to follow. Fringe accounts suggest some traders added secret markings to these sacks, like tiny folds or scratches, conveying information to other merchants about quality or origin. Historians still debate whether such subtle codes were common or occasional quirks. A group of merchants suggests ropes on a large caravan tent, their movements slow and coordinated. You probably wouldn't survive directing a caravan of this size alone, yet observing their deliberate actions, the soft creak of canvas and the muted clatter of tools is calming. Fringe stories claim certain knots or fabric folds carried hidden meanings, whether indicating ownership, route, or intended delivery date. Historians still argue whether such systems were formal or merely playful traditions passed down orally. You notice a small pile of polished stones near a merchant's stall, faintly gleaming in the late sunlight. Some fringe accounts suggest that travelers used these as markers, or even as tiny talismans tucked into goods for protection or luck. Historians still debate the authenticity of such practices, yet imagining them adds a layer of quiet whimsy to your observations. You probably wouldn't survive cataloging or distributing these items, yet the tiny glimmer catches your eye and draws you deeper into the slow rhythm of the yard. Nearby, a boy tends a group of pigeons, letting them flutter briefly before settling back into their cages. The soft rustle of wings adds a gentle soundtrack to the scene. Fringe tales suggest these birds sometimes carried secret messages or small tokens along the route, a subtle communication network that historians still argue about. You probably wouldn't survive the logistics of training and tracking them, yet watching is meditative, a slow dance of wings, wind, and whispered commerce. The courtyard grows quieter as the sun lowers, casting elongated shadows across stacked goods and neatly tied bundles. You notice the interplay of light on fabric folds, wooden barrels, and copper vessels, creating patterns that seem deliberate and calming. Fringe accounts suggest that travelers sometimes arranged goods to create visual codes or silent signals for others, though historians debate how intentional these arrangements truly were. You probably wouldn't survive deciphering or creating these signals, yet walking slowly, you can trace the rhythm in your imagination. You pause near a small tent where spices are being weighed and measured. A faint cloud of powdered cinnamon or saffron drifts in the air, lightly perfuming the sun-warmed ground. You probably wouldn't survive managing these delicate powders across a long journey. Yet, watching the careful, slow motions of the merchant brings a sense of soothing repetition. Fringe tales describe subtle folds in packaging that could indicate quality or origin, a silent language layered into trade, still debated by scholars. As the late afternoon shifts toward evening, the caravan yard hums with gentle activity. Camels shuffle, merchants exchange soft words, children run quietly in corners, and distant water trickles from troughs. You probably wouldn't survive orchestrating all these interconnected movements, yet the combined rhythm, the measured pace, and the layering of sound, scent, and motion lull your senses into a calm, reflective state. You feel immersed in centuries of quiet trade, human ingenuity, and playful secrecy, ready to drift along the Silk Route's gentle evening. The sky softens into gentle shades of pink and amber as evening settles over the town, and you trudge slowly toward the central square where travelers often pause before continuing across the desert. You probably wouldn't survive the sudden cool of dusk without careful layering and preparation. Yet, moving deliberately along the cobbled streets allows you to feel the day's work settle around you like a soft quilt. Fringe accounts suggest that travelers sometimes left small offerings at the square's central monument, a pile of stones, or a tiny token intended as good luck charms for those following behind, though historians still argue whether these were common practices or occasional whims. The air carries the mingled sense of dust, spent spices, and faintly sweet smoke rising from hearth fires. You notice merchants beginning to pack up their wares, folding cloths with deliberate care, stacking bundles of herbs and dried fruits neatly for overnight security. Fringe tales hint that some traders would arrange items in specific patterns as signals for fellow merchants, or to indicate what had been sold, subtle visual codes still debated by scholars. You probably wouldn't survive interpreting or maintaining such signals, but you watch with quiet fascination, letting the rhythmic folding and stacking soothe your senses. Nearby, children chase each other in arcs around the fountain at the square's center. Their laughter is soft and sporadic, blending harmoniously with the muted clinking of coins and the low hum of human voices. You probably wouldn't survive juggling commerce, animals, and playful children in such a small space, yet observing this gentle chaos provides a comforting sense of order within movement. Fringe accounts claim these games sometimes taught children trade skills or subtle lessons about timing, observation, and measurement, though historians debate the intentionality of such practices. A woman kneels on a small mat, gently arranging tiny packets of fragrant herbs and dried petals. The motion is slow and almost ceremonial, as if each bundle carries a story. Fringe tales suggest that the exact order or placement of these bundles could signal subtle messages to travelers familiar with the code. Historians still argue whether this was practical, symbolic, or whimsical, but the effect adds a layer of quiet charm to the otherwise ordinary task. You take a deep breath, inhaling the layered aromas that mingle with dust, stone, and fading sunlight. Camels shift gently nearby, lowering their heads to graze on sparse fodder laid out in neat rows. You probably wouldn't survive the meticulous care required to feed and water these animals for the long journey ahead, yet simply observing their movements, the subtle creaks of saddles, and the soft snorts of contentment is calming. Fringe accounts claim small bells or trinkets hung on harnesses served as silent indicators of ownership, route, or luck, though historians continue to debate their prevalence. A faint melody drifts from the narrow alley leading to the caravanserai. A young boy plays a reed flute, each note lingering softly in the evening air. Fringe stories suggest these tunes sometimes carried secret messages or signals to incoming travelers, though historians still argue whether this was intentional or largely anecdotal. You probably wouldn't survive interpreting such musical codes, but allowing the gentle notes to fill your awareness is soothing, blending with the ambient rhythm of the square. The central fountain glistens faintly under the waning light, the surface broken by soft ripples as water trickles over the stone edges. Travelers pause to refill vessels, wash hands, or simply linger, enjoying the cooling effect. Fringe accounts suggest that some coins left in the basin carried subtle markings or were intended as good luck charms, quietly communicating with future visitors. Historians still debate the authenticity of such claims, yet imagining them adds a playful layer to the sensory tapestry around you. You notice a merchant carefully stacking small clay pots filled with water and herbs, arranging them so that each catches the soft evening light. You probably wouldn't survive preparing such fragile goods for transport without precise attention. Yet, observing the slow, deliberate motions is almost hypnotic. Fringe tales claim tiny symbols were sometimes etched into the sides of pots to indicate their contents, source, or intended recipient, though historians debate the frequency of such practices. Nearby, a woman tends a small fire, stirring a pot of modest stew for her family and any passing travelers. The aroma drifts slowly, mingling with faint dust and the distant fragrance of herbs. You probably wouldn't survive cooking for so many in these conditions without careful pacing and patience, yet the gentle rhythm of stirring, smelling, and adjusting the fire blends into the town's collective calm. Fringe accounts suggest subtle gestures like the arrangement of ingredients or the timing of each stir could communicate nonverbal messages to other experienced cooks along the route. Children begin to settle, wrapping small bundles or placing simple toys in neat rows near their families. The soft rustle of cloth, The muted murmur of conversation and the distant clink of coins create a layered symphony of sound. You probably wouldn't survive managing all of this simultaneously, yet your role as a quiet observer allows you to trace the town's rhythm, noting the interplay of work, play, and gentle ritual. Camels rest quietly, lowering heads to the ground, their soft breathing blending with the fading hum of human activity. You probably wouldn't survive orchestrating the care of these animals in addition to trade, lodging, and cooking. Yet the stillness they provide adds a subtle, soothing cadence to the scene. Fringe stories suggest that resting patterns, small gestures, or even specific arrangements of the herd could carry meaning for observant travelers, though historians still argue about the prevalence of such practices. A soft breeze carries hints of distant spices, water, and earth as you wander past neatly stacked crates and folded textiles. Fringe accounts claim that small, almost imperceptible marks on goods indicated ownership, origin, or route instructions for traders, a secret code for the discerning eye. Historians continue to debate how systematic or playful these codes were, yet imagining them adds quiet intrigue to the otherwise tranquil evening. You probably wouldn't survive fully decoding or creating these subtle signs, but walking slowly, you can appreciate the care embedded in every action. The warm glow of evening deepens as lanterns begin to flicker along narrow streets and corners of the square. You probably wouldn't survive lighting, maintaining, and monitoring them all, yet observing the gentle illumination, the play of shadows, and the calm movement of traders and animals offers a soothing visual rhythm. Fringe tales suggest lantern placements were sometimes used as markers for specific caravan arrivals, though historians argue how widespread this practice actually was. Near a quiet corner, a young apprentice arranges small bundles of dried herbs and spices for tomorrow's market. You watch his hands move deliberately, pausing occasionally to straighten a string or adjust a bundle's angle. Fringe accounts suggest these small gestures sometimes conveyed hidden messages or indicated quality, while historians still debate the exact function or prevalence. You probably wouldn't survive maintaining such meticulous care over repeated days, yet the gentle repetition forms a calming cadence. By now, the town settles into a muted evening hum. The warm glow, soft sounds, gentle breeze, and subtle fragrances combine into a serene, layered atmosphere. You probably wouldn't survive orchestrating or fully participating in all these interwoven actions, yet walking slowly, observing, and letting your mind wander allows you to trace the Silk Route town's meditative rhythm, a soft story unfolding in time and space. Twilight deepens, and the first stars begin to twinkle over the rooftops as you trudge along narrow alleys toward the edge of the market. The shadows are long and soft, stretching across the clay walls, stalls, and piles of goods. You probably wouldn't survive navigating these lanes in complete darkness without experience, yet moving slowly allows you to notice subtle details. The faint glint of a copper coin left on a stall, the gentle sway of hanging fabrics in the evening breeze, the distant soft shuffle of camels settling in for the night. Fringe accounts suggest some traders left tiny tokens, folded notes, carved symbols, or small trinkets hidden in corners as silent messages for future visitors, though historians still debate their prevalence. A small tea stall emits gentle steam that curls into the cool night air, carrying the earthy scent of brewed herbs. You pause to watch the soft pour of water into clay cups, the faint clink as spoons stir slowly. You probably wouldn't survive brewing tea for a group of travelers in the desert without careful timing and precise motions, yet observing the deliberate actions is oddly soothing. Fringe tales hint that some merchants might sprinkle subtle aromatic powders into the brew, an almost playful gesture to delight guests, though historians still argue how common this practice really was. Nearby, a camel handler moves slowly among resting animals, adjusting ropes and checking harnesses under the dim glow of lanterns. The camel's soft breathing and occasional low hums blend seamlessly with the distant echo of a flute or the faint ripple of water from a nearby fountain. You probably wouldn't survive the constant vigilance required to care for these animals, yet simply observing their rhythm allows your own breathing to slow, falling into sync with the calm of the evening. Fringe accounts suggest subtle markings on harnesses or knotted ropes carried quiet information for other merchants, though historians continue to debate the exact significance. Children are gathering near the central square, their movements slower than in the afternoon, soft laughter mingling with the distant clinking of coins and the muted shuffle of merchants packing up. You probably wouldn't survive corralling both playful children and delicate wares, Yet the gentle arcs of movement, the pauses, and the soft exchanges create a meditative rhythm. Fringe stories suggest that these evening routines taught observation, patience, and subtle commerce skills, though historians argue how formal or intentional such lessons were. A soft glow radiates from a low clay oven where a baker tends a small batch of bread, turning loaves with careful hands. The faint scent of grains, yeast, and warm clay mixes with night air. You probably wouldn't survive baking for a dozen travelers while keeping pace with the desert's evening chill, yet observing the rhythmic care, the slow rotation of dough, the gentle tapping to check for readiness is hypnotic. Fringe accounts claim bakers occasionally hid tiny charms or marks on loaves for luck or secret communication, a playful touch that historians still debate. The fountain in the square gurgles softly as travelers pause to refill water vessels before heading into the night. You probably wouldn't survive the logistics of water distribution and animal care simultaneously, yet the rhythmic trickle, the faint reflection of lantern light on the surface, and the occasional ripple from a bird dipping its beak form a tranquil soundscape. Fringe stories describe coins left in the fountain as subtle markers or messages, though historians continue to debate how common this ritual was. You wander along the edge of the market, past stacks of woven mats, barrels of dried fruit, and neatly bundled textiles. A faint breeze lifts strands of fabric, carrying the layered scent of spices, herbs, and warm earth. You probably wouldn't survive maintaining and protecting these goods overnight, yet the scene's gentle rhythm is hypnotic. Fringe accounts suggest that traders sometimes arranged items subtly to convey information quality, origin, or route instructions, but historians still argue about their prevalence. A young apprentice carefully tends a small cluster of clay pots, filling them with herbs or water while humming softly. The muted scrape of clay, the faint clink of utensils, and the rhythm of his gentle movements create a meditative atmosphere. Fringe tales hint that the arrangement of pots might have served as subtle communication with fellow merchants, a hidden language of symbols in everyday routine, though historians still debate its significance. You probably wouldn't survive such precision and attention to detail in practice, yet watching is calming. The distant sound of a flute drifts from the alley, soft and melodic. You probably wouldn't survive decoding the potential messages in such a tune, yet letting the notes wash over you is soothing. Fringe stories suggest that itinerant musicians sometimes carried secret news or codes embedded in melodies, a soft layer of communication woven into evening life, though historians remain divided on whether this was common practice or anecdotal. Camels settle fully, heads lowered, and you notice the subtle rustle of straw beneath them, blending with the faint shuffle of human movement. You probably wouldn't survive orchestrating the care of animals, trade, and lodging simultaneously. Yet, standing in quiet observation allows your mind to drift, absorbed by the soft rhythm of the town at dusk. Fringe accounts claim that small, almost imperceptible arrangements of straw or feed signaled directions, status, or route information, but historians debate how intentional these signs truly were. A woman quietly arranges dried flowers and small bundles of herbs near a stall, her hands moving with deliberate care. The faint fragrance mingles with dust, night air, and the scent of water from the fountain. You probably wouldn't survive managing such intricate preparation for travelers, yet the gentle repetition is meditative. Fringe stories suggest these gestures sometimes communicated messages about origin, quality, or simply goodwill, though historians still argue the frequency and purpose. Nearby, the soft glow of lanterns casts elongated shadows over the alleys. You probably wouldn't survive monitoring all illumination while caring for animals and goods, yet observing the interplay of light and shadow adds a calm, almost hypnotic visual rhythm. Fringe tales suggest lantern placement occasionally served as signals to approaching caravans, though historians debate their prevalence. A faint whisper of wind carries subtle scents of spices, herbs, and baked bread. You pause, inhaling slowly, letting each layered aroma mingle with the sounds of settling camels and packing merchants. You probably wouldn't survive coordinating these sensory elements, yet simply walking slowly and observing lets your mind absorb a tranquil, gentle narrative woven from sight, sound, and scent. The square gradually quiets, activity slowing to near stillness. You probably wouldn't survive orchestrating the entire town's evening preparations, yet, standing here, the gentle clinks, soft breaths, rustling fabrics, and distant music create a meditative harmony. Fringe accounts describe tiny tokens, subtle messages, and ritual gestures scattered throughout, though historians still debate their prevalence, leaving you free to imagine them as quiet charms within the unfolding calm of twilight. By now, the town hums softly, a layered symphony of light, sound, scent, and movement. You probably wouldn't survive fully managing all of it, yet walking slowly, letting your senses trace each gentle rhythm, you sink into the meditative heartbeat of the Silk Route as night approaches, preparing for a quiet, restful evening. Night falls fully now, wrapping the town in a soft, inky cloak, broken only by the gentle glow of lanterns and the silver shimmer of moonlight on cobblestones. You trudge slowly along narrow lanes toward the town's outer walls, where the hush of evening is punctuated by faint rustles of camels settling, the soft shuffle of travelers arranging bedding, and the distant murmur of water trickling from fountains. You probably wouldn't survive navigating these silent streets in darkness without familiarity, yet moving slowly allows you to absorb every subtle sound and shadow, letting the town's quiet pulse guide your senses. Fringe accounts suggest that some traders left small notes or tokens tucked in corners for future visitors, though historians still debate how widespread or symbolic these practices were. You pause near a wooden gate where a few late arrivals adjust their pack animals, the soft clop of hooves and low snorts of camels mingling with the distant sigh of a wind gust through the walls. You probably wouldn't survive managing all arrivals and departures while caring for animals, yet simply watching the delicate choreography of travelers and beasts is calming. Fringe stories suggest subtle signals, small flags, folded cloths, or whispered cues were sometimes used to indicate lodgings or available accommodations, though historians still argue about their prevalence. A faint aroma of herbs drifts from a nearby stall where a woman quietly arranges bundles of lavender, thyme, and rosemary. The fragrant mix mingles with dust, moonlight, and the residual warmth of sun-baked stone, forming a soothing sensory blanket. You probably wouldn't survive preparing goods for the following day while maintaining care over every detail, yet watching her deliberate, rhythmic motions is almost hypnotic. Fringe accounts claim that small symbols or knots in the bundles indicated specific buyers or quality, though historians debate whether this was widespread or occasional. Nearby, a young apprentice brushes sand gently from a pile of folded textiles, the soft rustle and muted thump forming a subtle percussive rhythm. You probably wouldn't survive coordinating all these small tasks while observing commerce, animal care, and traveler needs. Yet watching allows your mind to slow and drift. Fringe tales suggest these seemingly mundane acts sometimes held secret meaning for experienced traders, though historians still argue their function or significance. The fountain in the square glimmers under the moonlight, the faint trickle of water reflecting silver across the surrounding stones. Travelers pause here, some quietly washing hands or filling water flasks for the night journey ahead. You probably wouldn't survive managing all water sources for the town and its caravans, yet the gentle sound is soothing, a hypnotic rhythm of life quietly continuing. Fringe accounts hint that coins left in the fountain carried subtle messages for future travelers, though historians debate their authenticity. You wander past a small oven where the last loaves of bread are removed, the warm scent mingling with night air and fading aromas of herbs. You probably wouldn't survive baking for an entire caravan while also maintaining nightly preparations, yet observing the soft, methodical motions of the baker, the gentle turn of dough, the tapping of a loaf to check doneness offers a comforting cadence. Fringe tales describe small marks or symbols left on loaves as quiet tokens of luck or secret messages, though historians still debate how common this was. A group of camels shifts gently near the outer pens, settling into straw. You probably wouldn't survive coordinating their care, yet their rhythmic breathing, the soft shuffle of hooves, and the faint rustle of straw combine to create a gentle, almost hypnotic background. Fringe accounts suggest subtle arrangements of feed, bedding, or harnesses may have served as silent communication, though historians remain divided on whether these were intentional signals or incidental patterns. Nearby, a lantern flickers softly, casting warm, elongated shadows across the walls and alleyways. You probably wouldn't survive tending every lantern and light source while managing goods, animals, and travelers. Yet the slow dance of light and shadow adds a calming visual rhythm to the quiet evening. Fringe stories hint that certain lantern positions indicated caravan arrivals or departures, a silent language that historians still debate. A soft melody drifts from a narrow alley, a reed, flute, or string instrument played by a young traveler winding down after a long day. You probably wouldn't survive decoding subtle information possibly encoded in these notes, yet letting the music wash over you is calming, a gentle lullaby woven into the night. Fringe accounts suggest that melodies sometimes carried messages between caravans, though historians argue how prevalent or intentional this practice was. You pause at the edge of the square, watching a woman lay small bundles of dried flowers and herbs in neat patterns. The motion is slow, deliberate, and almost ceremonial, the fragrance mingling with night air. Fringe tales suggest that the arrangements sometimes conveyed messages, offered tokens of goodwill, or indicated quality, though historians debate the extent to which these practices were common. You probably wouldn't survive preparing such intricate details while balancing all other nightly duties, yet observing is soothing in itself. A distant rustle announces a family settling into their sleeping quarters, folding mats and blankets carefully before extinguishing small oil lamps. You probably wouldn't survive orchestrating all these nightly routines at once, yet the measured, deliberate pace creates a gentle rhythm to follow. Fringe accounts claim subtle gestures in bed arrangements, bundle placement, or item orientation may have been silent signals for others, though historians still debate their authenticity. The soft clinking of coins fades as the last few merchants pack for the night. You probably wouldn't survive managing all trade and bookkeeping alone, yet the soft echo forms a faint percussion against the other gentle nighttime sounds. Water trickling, camels sighing, fabric rustling. Fringe tales suggest that coins left strategically for future traders carried coded messages, though historians argue about their prevalence. You wander past small alleys where lantern light flickers on clay walls. You probably wouldn't survive navigating or maintaining all these narrow paths, yet simply moving allows you to trace the town's quiet pulse. Fringe accounts hint that hidden markings on walls, door frames, or street corners sometimes communicated directions or secrets, though historians still debate whether these were widespread or anecdotal. Camels and animals are fully settled, children asleep, and the soft hum of distant voices fades into near silence. You probably wouldn't survive orchestrating all elements of the town at this hour, yet, standing here, the faint silver light, soft rustle of fabrics, and subtle night scents form a meditative, calming tableau. Fringe stories suggest that travelers often left small tokens for the next caravan, though historians still argue how common this practice was. By now, the Silk Route town rests almost entirely, humming quietly with the accumulated rhythms of the day. You probably wouldn't survive managing all life and trade here, yet walking slowly, letting every sight, sound, and scent weave together, you feel the gentle, enduring heartbeat of this lost place, ready to drift toward rest. The moon climbs higher, casting a gentle silver glow over the rooftops and narrow alleys, painting long, serene shadows across the town. You trudge along a quiet street, your footsteps soft on the worn cobblestones. You probably wouldn't survive navigating these lanes alone at night without careful attention, yet the calm rhythm of your steps allows you to feel fully present in the hushed town. Fringe accounts suggest that subtle markings on door frames or roof beams might have served as guides for nocturnal travelers. Though historians still argue whether these signs were common or anecdotal. Near a small courtyard, the last traces of human activity fade. A merchant tidies his stall one final time, brushing dust from baskets of dried fruit and herbs. You probably wouldn't survive this late evening meticulousness, balancing the fatigue of the day with a careful order of goods. Yet watching the slow, methodical movements is almost hypnotic. Fringe tales hint that these tiny acts sometimes carried hidden meaning marks or arrangements, signaling quality, origin, or secret messages for fellow traders. Or secret messages for fellow traders. Though historians debate their prevalence, you pause to listen to the distant trickle of water from the fountain in the central square. The soft sound mingles with the gentle sigh of wind moving through alleys and the faint rustle of straw from resting camels. You probably wouldn't survive maintaining the care of all these animals and structures alone, yet letting your mind drift with the soft, steady cadence of water is deeply soothing. Fringe accounts suggest coins left in fountains or small stones tucked nearby may have carried messages for future travelers, historians continue to debate their authenticity. Nearby, a blacksmith's workshop is silent, the iron and tools resting after a long day of hammering and shaping. You probably wouldn't survive the physical demands of this craft, yet observing the tools left neatly on racks, the anvil cold and still, evokes a comforting sense of order and routine. Fringe stories suggest apprentices sometimes left tiny tiny
as
marks on
personal
tools
signatures or
as
secret
personal
messages.
signatures or secret
Though
messages,
historians
though
argue how
historians argue
widespread
how
this practice
widespread
was,
this
the
practice
soft
was.
glow of
The
lanterns
soft glow of
stretches along the
lanterns
alleys,
stretches along the
casting
alleys,
warm pools of light
casting
that
warm
mingle with
pools of light
shadows.
that mingle with
You
shadows.
probably wouldn't survive
You
tending
probably
all these
wouldn't
lamps
survive
while
tending all
overseeing
these
animals,
lamps while overseeing
trade, and
animals,
lodging. Yet
trade,
simply
and
noticing the
lodging.
patterns of
Yet
illumination
simply
and
noticing
darkness
the
is
patterns
calming.
of
A
illumination
slow
and
dance of
darkness
light
is
guiding your
calming.
eyes along
A
the
slow
quiet
dance
streets.
of light guiding your
Fringe
eyes along
accounts
the
claim
quiet
lanterns
streets.
occasionally
Fringe
served as
accounts
subtle
claim lanterns
indicators for
occasionally
travelers or
served as subtle
caravans.
indicators for
Though
travelers
historians
or
debate their
caravans,
frequency,
though historians
you wander
debate their
past the
frequency.
final market
You wander
stalls,
past
where
the final
baskets
market
of herbs,
stalls,
dried
where
flowers,
baskets of
and
herbs,
woven
dried
goods remain
flowers, and
neatly
woven goods
arranged in
remain neatly
preparation for
arranged in
morning.
preparation for
You
morning.
probably wouldn't
You
survive
probably wouldn't
managing
survive
all of this
managing
for a
all of
day's
this for a
market.
day's
Yet
market.
observing the
Yet
deliberate
observing the
order,
deliberate
soft
order,
textures,
soft
and muted
textures,
colors
and
is
muted
almost
colors
meditative.
is almost
Fringe
meditative.
tales suggest
Fringe
merchants
tales suggest
sometimes left
merchants
subtle
sometimes left
hints in
subtle
arrangements
hints
for
in
favored
arrangements for
customers.
favored
Though
customers.
historians
Though
still argue
historians
how
still argue
intentional
how
such
intentional
practices
such
were.
practices were.
Camels rest
Camels
in the outer
rest in the outer
pens, breathing
pens,
softly,
breathing
the faint
softly.
rustle of
The
straw
faint
under their
rustle of
hooves,
straw under their
blending
hooves,
with distant
blending with
night
distant
sounds.
night sounds.
You
You
probably
probably
wouldn't survive
survive
orchestrating all animal care
alongside
alongside
trade and
trade and
lodging.
lodging. Yet the gentle
Yet the
rhythm of
gentle
their
rhythm of their
breathing
breathing
and
and
the
the
soft
soft
sigh
sigh
of
of
wind
wind
through
through
the
the pens
pens forms a
comforting
soundtrack.
soundtrack.
Fringe
Fringe
accounts
accounts
suggest that the orientation of animals or subtle gestures could carry silent information for traders, though historians continue to debate their significance. A young apprentice quietly arranges small bundles of dried herbs, the faint fragrance mingling with cool night air.
You
You
probably wouldn't survive the precision
required
required to maintain
these
these
delicate goods.
Yet observing the deliberate, repeated motions is soothing,
almost like watching a slow, soft dance.
Fringe tales hint that these bundles occasionally carried symbolic messages or acted as tiny charms, though historians argue the prevalence of such practices. You pause near the fountain again, noticing the silvery reflection of moonlight on its rippling surface. Travelers long gone have left faint impressions, coins or small tokens behind, a subtle echo of those who passed through before.
You probably wouldn't survive tracking every hidden mark or
yet
token,
imagining their quiet messages adds a gentle layer of intrigue to the night.
Fringe accounts
Fringe accounts suggest these gestures were small acts of connection,
though historians still debate whether they were practical, ritualistic, or playful. The distant sound of a reed flute drifts faintly from an alley, notes soft
You probably wouldn't
and
survive
lingering.
deciphering hidden
You probably
signals
wouldn't
in
survive
music.
deciphering
Yet
hidden
letting
signals
the
in
gentle
music.
tune fill your
Yet
senses
letting the
is
gentle
soothing.
tune
A
fill your
lullaby
senses
layered
is
atop the
soothing.
subtle
A
sounds of the
lullaby
town
layered
settling.
atop the subtle
Fringe
sounds of the
stories
town
suggest
settling.
melodies
Fringe
sometimes
stories
carried
suggest
messages
melodies
between
sometimes carried
caravans.
messages
Though
between
historians
caravans.
continue
Though
to argue
historians
their
continue to
authenticity.
argue their
A
authenticity.
faint breeze
A faint breeze lifts dust and
brushing
straw,
against your skin
brushing
and
against your
carrying the
skin and
delicate
carrying the
scent of
delicate
spices
scent
and
of
herbs
spices
from nearby
and herbs
stalls.
from nearby
You probably
stalls.
wouldn't survive the
You probably
coordination
wouldn't
of
survive the
commerce, animal
coordination
care,
of commerce,
and nightly
animal
preparations
care,
alone.
and nightly
Yet
preparations
walking
alone.
slowly allows
Yet
your
walking
senses to
slowly
trace the soft,
allows your senses
meditative
to
rhythm
trace
of
the
the town.
soft, meditative
Fringe
rhythm
accounts
of
hint
the
at
town.
hidden signs in
Fringe
this careful
accounts hint
placement
at
of
hidden
goods,
signs
though
in this careful
historians
placement
debate
of
their
goods,
meaning and
though
frequency.
historians
You
debate their
pass
meaning
under
and
a small
frequency.
archway
You
where
pass
shadows
under a
and
small
moonlight
archway
mingle.
where shadows and
You
moonlight
probably
mingle.
wouldn't survive
You probably
maintaining
wouldn't
all
survive
lanterns,
maintaining all
ensuring
lanterns,
safe paths,
ensuring safe
and caring
paths,
for
and
travelers
caring
and
for
animals
travelers and animals
simultaneously.
simultaneously.
Yet the interplay
Yet
of light and shadow creates a serene visual cadence.
Fringe
Fringe
tales
tales
suggest such paths
sometimes held markers for late-night travelers,
though
historians still argue about the prevalence. Nearby,
a woman quietly arranges bedding and mats for her family and any remaining travelers.
You probably wouldn't survive managing this while overseeing the wider town. Yet watching the slow, careful placement of each item is calming.
Fringe accounts suggest subtle gestures in these arrangements sometimes communicated care, status, or messages, though historians debate their significance. The distant murmur of conversation fades into near silence. You probably wouldn't survive orchestrating all aspects of the town at night. Yet simply moving through the streets, noticing faint gestures, sounds, and shadows, allows your mind to slow.
Fringe stories hint that hidden signals, small offerings, and subtle marks were a quiet language of the Silk Route, though historians still debate their authenticity. By now, the entire town seems wrapped in gentle stillness. You probably wouldn't survive maintaining its pulse, yet walking slowly, observing subtle rhythms of sound, light, and scent, you feel the town's heartbeat in every step. The quiet interplay of human activity, animal life, and layered sensory cues creates a meditative harmony, preparing you for rest under the soft gaze of the moon. The night deepens, and the town rests beneath a quiet sky dotted with countless stars. You trudge slowly along the final lanes, noticing the soft silver light brushing rooftops, walls, and quiet stalls. You probably wouldn't survive orchestrating every last task, the care of animals, the arrangement of goods, the subtle signals left for other travelers, but simply walking allows you to feel the soft rhythm of life paused, yet lingering like a gentle heartbeat. Fringe accounts hint that small tokens, hidden notes, or subtle gestures were left throughout the town for future visitors, though historians still debate whether these were common practice or occasional whimsy. You pause near the central fountain one last time, where the faint trickle of water seems amplified in the still night. Travelers long gone have left tiny coins, marks, or tokens, whispers of those who passed before you. You probably wouldn't survive cataloging all these small messages, yet imagining them creates a quiet, contemplative atmosphere. Fringe stories suggest these tokens carried subtle instructions, blessings, or playful notes for the next traveler, though historians argue about the prevalence of such customs. Nearby, a lantern flickers, its glow soft and warm, stretching gentle shadows across the cobblestones. You probably wouldn't survive lighting and monitoring every lamp, yet observing the slow, deliberate play of light and darkness is soothing, a meditative dance of shadow and illumination. Fringe accounts suggest lantern placement may have occasionally indicated caravan arrivals or safe paths, though historians still debate how intentional such signaling truly was. Camels breathe softly in their pens, occasionally shifting, their low groans blending into the quiet night. You probably wouldn't survive orchestrating their care while managing traders, travelers, and goods, yet simply observing their gentle rhythm is calming. Fringe tales hint that subtle positioning of animals, their feed, or harnesses sometimes conveyed silent messages to those familiar with the routes, though historians remain divided on the authenticity of such practices. A soft melody drifts faintly from a distant alley, a young musician's notes lingering like whispers on the wind. You probably wouldn't survive decoding any hidden meaning in such tunes, yet letting the music wash over you is soothing, a gentle nocturne accompanying the soft sounds of the town settling. Fringe accounts suggest melodies sometimes carried subtle signals between traders, though historians continue to debate their prevalence. You pass by the last remaining stalls, where neatly arranged baskets, bundles of herbs, and small clay pots wait for the coming day. You probably wouldn't survive preparing, monitoring, and arranging all of this, yet the soft textures, muted colors, and deliberate order create a calming, hypnotic rhythm. Fringe stories hint at hidden messages within these arrangements, though historians argue how intentional or common such codes truly were. The faint scent of herbs, spices, and baked bread lingers in the cool night air. You probably wouldn't survive maintaining these sensory layers while overseeing all town activities, yet walking slowly, breathing deeply, and noticing these gentle aromas connects you to the Silk Route town's quiet pulse. Fringe accounts suggest certain scents were subtly used as signals for traders, though historians debate their significance. Children and families are fully settled, soft breaths mingling with the night air. You probably wouldn't survive coordinating all these routines, yet the rhythmic, settling, quiet movements and soft fabric rustles form a soothing cadence. Fringe tales suggest subtle arrangements of bedding or personal items communicated messages or signals, though historians still argue their frequency or intention. The final blacksmith workshop rests in silence, the iron-cooled tools neatly placed. You probably wouldn't survive a day of this labor, yet observing the stillness offers a quiet sense of order and completion. Fringe stories hint that small apprentice marks or signatures remained on tools or projects as playful messages, though historians debate their prevalence. A gentle wind stirs the town, lifting loose straw and dust, carrying faint scents from the last remaining herbs, spices, and baked goods. You probably wouldn't survive coordinating all nightly details, yet walking slowly allows your senses to trace the town's quiet heartbeat. Fringe tales hint that subtle arrangements or hidden markers created a soft, layered language of navigation, commerce, and care, though historians still debate their intent. Lanterns glow faintly in alleys, casting gentle pools of light and shadow. You probably wouldn't survive tending every lantern, yet simply noticing the interplay of illumination and darkness is meditative, a visual rhythm that accompanies the night. Fringe accounts suggest lanterns sometimes indicated paths or safety to arriving travelers, though historians continue to argue their significance. The fountain murmurs gently, reflecting the moon's silver glow. You probably wouldn't survive monitoring water sources while balancing animals and trade, yet the soft ripple, faint splash, and occasional coin glint form a hypnotic lullaby. Fringe stories suggest small objects left in water carried messages or luck, though historians debate their prevalence. Walking through quiet streets, you observe the faint interplay of shadows, textures, and soft scents. You probably wouldn't survive orchestrating all elements of the town at night, yet moving slowly, letting every gentle rhythm sink in, you feel immersed in the Silk Route's quiet pulse. Fringe tales hint at hidden markers, tiny tokens, and subtle signals interwoven throughout daily life. Though historians debate their authenticity, the town rests almost entirely now, camels breathing softly, lanterns glowing faintly, and the distant flute notes fading into night. You probably wouldn't survive managing all activity, yet walking slowly allows you to trace the meditative heartbeat of this lost town. Every sound, scent, and movement feels deliberate, calm, and layered a final lullaby to guide your senses towards sleep. By now, you're fully immersed in the gentle night, surrounded by centuries of quiet routines, playful secrets, and layered sensory rhythms. You probably wouldn't survive managing the town alone, yet letting yourself drift with its soft pulse carries you slowly into a relaxed, almost dreamlike state, ready to rest. The night stretches across the town, soft and velvety, with each cobblestone, lantern, and resting camel bathed in gentle moonlight. You breathe slowly, inhaling the layered scents of herbs, spices, and warm stone that linger in the cool air. Every sound is softened. The subtle trickle of water, the distant rustle of straw, the gentle sigh of a breeze through narrow alleys. You feel the steady heartbeat of the town pulsing beneath you, a rhythm measured not in urgency, but in patience, care, and quiet continuity. The soft glow of lanterns and moonlight together paints elongated shadows, creating slow-moving patterns that drift across walls, floors, and rooftops. You watch these shapes shift as if the town itself were breathing, alive in gentle motion. Camels rest in the outer pens, their steady breathing a subtle percussion that harmonizes with the faint sounds of distant musical notes and muted human movements. Children and families sleep in neat, carefully arranged bedding, the soft folds of fabric and careful placement of belongings, a quiet testament to care, continuity, and shared history. You let your mind drift along the rhythms of the Silk Route, imagining small tokens hidden in corners, faint messages etched into wood, and tiny flourishes on loaves or textiles playful, subtle acts that echo across centuries. Fringe stories and scholarly debates fade as the sensory layers of sight, sound, and scent carry you deeper into calm. You trace the gentle arcs of human movement, the soft rustle of fabric, the subtle glimmer of lanterns on cobblestones, and allow yourself to merge with the town's slow, deliberate pulse. Every step, every sound, every delicate interaction becomes part of a lullaby. Your breathing slows to match the cadence of the town. Your heartbeat finds harmony with camels, flowing water, and whispered wind. The Silk Route town exists in this moment purely for quiet reflection, gentle curiosity, and the soft unfolding of evening into night. You feel fully present, yet free to drift. Sleep begins to brush against your eyelids as the layered rhythms of centuries-old life carry you gently, softly, and completely into rest.